The roaring V8, the aggressive styling, the rumbling exhaust that makes your chest vibrate. Classic muscle cars were built to intimidate. But what happens when that fearsome growl is all bark and no bite? Today, we're exposing the automotive world's greatest sound warriors. 10 iconic muscle cars that thundered like drag racers but performed like family sedans. These machines promise thrilling speed through their earth-shaking exhaust notes, yet left drivers disappointed when they hit the gas. From neutered Mustangs to suffocated Camaros, these are the muscle cars that automotive marketers hoped you'd buy with your ears instead of a stopwatch. The 1974 Ford Mustang II. The Mustang name carries weight in automotive history, but the 1974 Mustang II is the black sheep of this legendary family. Born during the oil crisis, Ford was forced to compromise performance for fuel economy. Built on the humble Ford Pinto platform, this imposter wore Mustang badges while hiding a severely underpowered heart. Despite its aggressive styling and artificially enhanced exhaust note, the standard 2.8-liter V6 produced a mere 105 horsepower. For context, that's less power than many modern economy cars. The result? A painfully slow 10.5-second crawl to 60 mph. Ford even offered a 4-cylinder version with just 88 horsepower, a far cry from the tire-shredding Mustangs of the 1960s. The marketing department worked overtime to preserve the Mustang's performance image through styling cues and an exhaust system tuned to sound more aggressive than the car's performance warranted. Car and Driver magazine famously described it as a sheep in wolf's clothing, noting the disconnect between its muscle car image and economy car performance. The 1980-1981 Chevrolet Camaro Z28. The third-generation Camaro debuted with futuristic styling that screamed speed. The Z28 version, in particular, looked ready for battle. With its bulging hood scoop, aggressive body kit, and dual exhaust that produced a satisfying rumble at idle and a throaty roar at full throttle. Underneath this impressive exterior, however, was a severely neutered machine. Emissions regulations had strangled American performance cars, and the Camaro was a prime victim. The California Spec 1980 Z28 came with a 5.0-liter V8 that produced a mere 165 horsepower, less than half of what similar-sized engines had made a decade earlier. This resulted in a 0 to 60 mph time of about 8.5 seconds, barely faster than many family sedans of the time. Road and track testing confirmed that despite its ferocious sound, the Z28 couldn't back up its oral promises with actual performance. The car's exhaust note wrote checks its engine couldn't cash. The 1976 Pontiac Trans Am, few muscle cars achieved the iconic status of the Trans Am, especially after Burt Reynolds immortalized it in Smokey and the Bandit. With its screaming chicken hood decal, shaker scoop, and side exit exhaust that produced a distinctive rumble, the 1976 Trans Am looked and sounded like the ultimate performance machine. The reality was far less impressive. The base model came with a massive 455 cubic inch, 7.5-liter V8. That, on paper, should have been a monster. But due to restrictive emissions equipment, this enormous engine produced just 200 horsepower, about what a modern 4-cylinder turbo can achieve with less than half the displacement. This resulted in a 0 to 60 mph time of around 8.4 seconds, respectable for the emissions-strangled mid-1970s, but nowhere near what its aggressive sound and appearance suggested. Motor trend testing from the era confirmed that while the car sounded like it could dominate the drag strip, its actual quarter-mile times were disappointing. The 1975 Dodge Charger SE, the Dodge Charger name, had been synonymous with serious muscle since the late 1960s, with early models featuring some of the most powerful engines of the muscle car era. By 1975, the Charger SE Special Edition retained the aggressive styling and thundering exhaust note, but lost the performance that made the nameplate famous. The largest engine available, a 400 cubic inch, 6.6-liter V8, produced just 190 horsepower, down over 100 horsepower from similar engines just a few years earlier. Weighing nearly 4,300 pounds, the Charger SE was also significantly heavier than its predecessors. This combination of increased weight and decreased power resulted in a 0 to 60 mph time of about 9.5 seconds. Contemporary road tests by CarCraft magazine noted that while the car's exhaust note suggested serious performance, the actual acceleration couldn't match the soundtrack. It was, as one reviewer put it, all thunder and no lightning. The 1978 AMC AMX American Motors Corporation, always the underdog of American car manufacturers, tried to keep the muscle car flame alive with the 1978 AMX. Based on the Concord Coupe, it featured sporty styling cues, hood bulges, and a performance-oriented exhaust system that produced a satisfying rumble that seemed out of character for an AMC product. Looking at its specifications, the AMX appeared to have potential. Its 304 cubic inch, 5.0-liter Optima V8 seemed substantial on paper. However, this engine generated only 130 horsepower, less than many modern four-cylinder engines. This anemic output resulted in a 0-60 mph time of approximately 10 seconds. AMC's marketing department worked hard to position the AMX as a performance car, with advertisements highlighting the car's aggressive sound and appearance. But, as AutoWeek noted in a period review, the AMX sounds like it means business, but fails to deliver when the light turns green. The 1977-79 Mercury Cougar XR7. The Mercury Cougar began life as Ford's more luxurious answer to the Mustang, offering a blend of performance and comfort. By the late 1970s, the Cougar XR7 had evolved into a personal luxury coupe that retained some muscle car pretensions, including a deep, growling exhaust note designed to evoke its performance heritage. With its long hood, opera windows, and luxury muscle car styling, the XR7 certainly looked the part. Its dual exhaust system was tuned to produce a satisfying rumble that suggested serious power under the hood. Even the marketing highlighted the car's cat-like growl. Unfortunately, even with its largest available engine, a 400 cubic inch, 6.6-liter V8, it produced just 180 horsepower. This resulted in a 0 to 60 mph time of around 9 seconds. Car and driver testing confirmed that despite the impressive sound, the Cougar XR7's performance was mediocre at best, calling it a sheep in cat's clothing. The 1974-1976 Plymouth Roadrunner, the Plymouth Roadrunner, began life in 1968 as one of the purest expressions of the muscle car formula, a mid-size car with minimal frills and maximum performance. By the mid-1970s, however, it had lost much of its performance edge while trying to maintain its image through styling cues and an aggressive exhaust note. The 1974 to 1976 models came with a 318 cubic inch, 5.2-liter V8 as standard, producing just 170 horsepower. Even with the optional 400 cubic inch, 6.6-liter engine, output was limited to 190 horsepower, less than half of what the Roadrunner had offered in its prime. This resulted in 0 to 60 times of approximately 8.5 seconds. Respectable for the emissions-strangled era, but far from the tire-smoking performance that made the Roadrunner famous. Hot Rod magazine noted in a 1975 review that the Roadrunner's exhaust note remains impressive, even if its performance doesn't live up to the sound. The 1975 Oldsmobile Cutlass 442, the Oldsmobile 442, which originally stood for 4-barrel carburetor, 4-speed manual, and dual exhaust, had once been a formidable muscle car. By 1975, it was more about appearance and sound than actual performance, though it maintained its dual exhaust system that produced an impressive rumble. The 75-stump 442 came with a massive 455 cubic inch, 7.5-liter V8, which in earlier years had been a powerhouse. By 1975, however, this engine was severely detuned to meet emissions standards, producing just 190 horsepower despite its enormous displacement. This resulted in a 0 to 60 mph time of about 9 seconds. Motor Trend testing from the era noted the disconnect between the car's aggressive sound and its actual performance. One reviewer wrote, "The 442 still sounds like a muscle car, but drives like your father's Oldsmobile." The 1977 to 1979 Pontiac Can-Am. The Pontiac Can-Am was an attempt to recapture some of the GTO's glory in the late 1970s. Based on the Le Mans, this limited production muscle car featured aggressive styling with a distinctive rear spoiler, bold graphics, and a performance-oriented exhaust system that produced a deep, throaty sound reminiscent of earlier Pontiac muscle cars. Despite the performance imagery and impressive sound, the Can-Am was equipped with a 400 cubic inch, 6.6-liter V8 that produced only 180 horsepower. This resulted in a 0-60 mph time of approximately 8.5 seconds. Not terrible for the era, but nowhere near what its aggressive sound and appearance suggested. Production numbers were low, with under 1,400 Can-Ams built. Today, they're sought after by collectors not for their performance, but for their rarity and distinctive styling. As Hemmings Muscle Machines noted in a retrospective, the Can-Am sounded like the GTOs of old, but performed like the emissions-restricted cars of its time. The 1976 Ford Gran Torino Elite. The Gran Torino Elite was Ford's attempt to create a personal luxury coupe with muscle car overtones. It combined luxury features with muscle car styling cues and a dual exhaust system that produced a pleasing rumble intended to evoke the high-performance Torinos of earlier years. The Elite styling was certainly impressive, with a long hood, short deck, and formal roofline that gave it a commanding presence. Its exhaust note was similarly designed to impress, with a deep burble at idle and a satisfying roar under acceleration. However, even with its largest 460 cubic inch, 7.5-liter V8 engine, it produced just 202 horsepower. This meager output, combined with the car's substantial weight, over 4,200 pounds, resulted in a 0 to 60 mph time of around 9 seconds. Car and Driver described it as a car that sounds faster than it goes, noting that the impressive exhaust note couldn't compensate for the underwhelming acceleration. Conclusion: these classic muscle cars from the 1970s represent a fascinating period in automotive history when marketing departments had to work overtime to maintain performance images, while engineers grappled with increasingly strict emissions and fuel economy standards. The result was a generation of cars that sounded much more powerful than they actually were. The disconnect wasn't always intentional deception. Manufacturers were trying to preserve some semblance of the muscle car experience during challenging times. They maintained the aggressive styling and throaty exhaust notes while being forced to significantly detune engines to meet government regulations. Today, these vehicles are appreciated more for their distinctive styling, historical significance, and yes, their impressive sound rather than their actual performance capabilities. They represent an interesting transition period when the American automotive industry was struggling to redefine itself in the face of changing priorities. Modern muscle cars have fortunately reclaimed their performance credentials while maintaining their distinctive sound. Today's Mustangs, Camaros, and Challengers produce both the sound and speed that their 1970s counterparts could only pretend to deliver. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the world of classic muscle cars that sounded faster than they actually were, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more automotive content that separates fact from fiction. Your support helps keep these automotive history lessons coming. And there are plenty more stories from the road to share. Thanks for watching.